Let me know. As Lisa mentioned, I worked at Christians United for Israel for a long time. And I would speak in churches, and sometimes after my speech, people would come up to me and say, it's a shame we couldn't hear you that well. They really need to work on the sound system. I've never had that problem in a synagogue. People tend to let you know if they can't hear you. I trust you will do me that favor if you're not hearing me. Please let me know. And as Lisa mentioned, I was a graduate of Harvard Law School. I was the class of 1991. We had some other interesting people in my class. A guy that was in my section at law school, lived down the hall from me, was named Neil Gorsuch. He's now
Gorsuch.
He was always a very impressive guy, Neil. Behaved then like he behaves now. As a young guy, he was never a wild character at law school. There was also another guy in my class at law school, and everyone talked about him. Neil was great. No one really talked about Neil all that much. They talked about this other guy. They said, this guy is amazing. This guy is impressive. One day, this guy is going to be a United States Senator. They were right, but they underestimated him. This guy was a United States Senator and also President of the United States. His name was Barack Obama. When I work with students a lot on the issue of Israel. When I tell people, hey, take the time to talk to your classmates. Take the time to persuade them about Israel. Take the time to make sure they understand the truth about Israel, because you never know where they end up one day. I mean that, quite personally. I wish I had gotten a hold of this guy in law school and had some conversations with him. I didn't. And there's a price to be paid for that. So the stakes are high, and every relationship counts. We have a lot of challenges today, those of us who care about Israel. We have a lot of threats. But I just want to highlight the good news. And this really is good news. The truth is on our side. Our challenge is to share the truth, to share it repeatedly, to share it proudly, to share it effectively. But the truth is very much on our side. And so we don't have to be afraid of exposing people to Israel. We don't have to be afraid of people learning more about our topic. The more people know, the better. The other side has to constantly lie and dissemble and protest. We take lots of people to Israel. So they protest our trips. They try to keep people from going on a free trip to Israel. Their job is to make sure they never see the reality. They never see the truth. That's a hard job. Our job is just to share the truth. The problem is, though, as you all know, a narrative is emerging. And the narrative, and it's gaining speed and gaining credibility, especially on college campuses. And it's grown so much, it's grown into such a consensus that it's doing something that troubles me deeply. It's bad enough that non-Jews don't like Israel. Bad enough that non-Jews criticize Israel. But what we're seeing more and more is that our own Jewish young people are buying into these myths and buying into these lies and believe they have to make a choice in life. Either they're going to be good, moral people, or they're going to support Israel. But you can't do both. A sad and tragic state of affairs when young people are burdened with what they believe is a choice between standing by their Jewish heritage in the Jewish state or doing what is right and what is moral. It should never have gotten to this sad state of affairs. And the only way to challenge the sad state of affairs is to know the reality, know the facts, and share the facts effectively, proudly, and relentlessly. As Lisa mentioned, I don't want to take too much time. I want to open up for Q&A, but I just want to, I thought what might be helpful or effective is just to share 3 myths that are prevalent on college campuses. There are many myths, unfortunately, about Israel that are prevalent on college campuses, but to share 3 myths that are prevalent on college campuses today about Israel, and to show not only are they not true, but the exact opposite is true. And there's something in learning how false the myths are, how the exact opposite is true, that I think is encouraging and energizing when it comes to the work we need to do in our own community and beyond. So let's just go through 3 myths very quickly and see how they stack up against the facts. Myth number 1, gaining credibility on college campuses, an article of faith among many of Israel's critics. You all know, as Jews started returning to the ancient land of Israel in the late 1800s and early 1900s, there are other people living there, right? Arabs. So Jews coming back home, wanting to live in the land of Israel, had to more or less kick them out, right? And you could only fit so many people in a place. So if Jews want to come home to Israel, well, they have to take the houses from Arabs, right? And they have to take the land from Arabs, and they had to kick Arabs out. Jewish return to the land of Israel meant the ethnic cleansing of the Arabs of the region, right?
Wrong.
Good to see your head shaking. This is an article of faith based on silly logic. It's as if you could freeze the population of Phoenix, in 1920, and then assume every new person coming in has to kick someone out. Have you never heard of growth? Have you never heard of economic opportunity? The facts are startling. The peak years of Jewish immigration to what was called the British Mandated Palestine, land of Israel. The peak years of Jewish immigration before the birth of the State of Israel were from 1922 to 1947. If the British were ruling the land of Israel, they were letting Jews come back home. Jews were coming back by the hundreds of thousands, 1922 to 1947. So during these peak years of Jewish immigration to the British Mandate for Palestine, how much did the Arab population of Palestine shrink? Did it shrink by 50%? Did it shrink by 75%? It increased. No shrinkage. It increased, and it increased dramatically. The Arab population of the British Mandate for Palestine increased from 1922 to 1947 from 500,000 to 1.2 million. That is growth of 120% in 25 years. That is a population boom of unprecedented proportions. Because as you all know, when Jews were coming back to their land, they built farms and they built factories and they built businesses, and Arabs streamed in to take advantage of the economic opportunities. As Phoenix could grow, so too did the opportunity in the population of the land of Israel. This was a blessing. And as Jews came back, they brought their doctors and their medicine with them. Arab life expectancies went up. Arab infant mortality went down. And what proves this more startling is when you look at the cities. You look at the population of the cities from 1922 to 1947. Look at cities to which Jews were immigrating. Haifa, Jews were going to Haifa. The Arab population of Haifa during this period increased by 290% in 25 years. Jaffa, Jews were going to Jaffa. The Arab population of Jaffa increased by 160% in 25 years. Now look at cities of the British Mandate for Palestine to which Jews were not moving. Nablus, during the same period, the population grew by only 56%. Bethlehem, to which Jews were not moving, the population grew by only 37%. So myth number 1, Jews coming back to their homeland necessitated the ethnic cleansing of the local Arabs. Not only not true, the exact opposite was true. It created economic opportunities and social welfare that drew Arabs in and dramatically led to a dramatic increase in the Arab population. It's myth number 1. Okay, fair enough. You can point that out to people, they'll be quick to say, okay. But what about myth number 2? Fine, the Jews didn't kick anyone out. Fine, the Arab population dramatically increased. But then there was the War of 1947-48, Israel's War of Independence. And you all know what happened then, right? Just read briefly what happened then. I think you all know. This is Mahmoud Abbas writing in the New York Times. He's talking about the partition vote. UN votes in 47 to partition the British Mandate for Palestine into 2 states, 1 Jewish, 1 Arab. And he writes, shortly after this UN vote, Zionist forces expelled Palestinian Arabs to ensure a decisive Jewish majority in the future state of Israel. Arab armies intervened, war and further expulsions ensued. Right, so okay, there was no ethnic cleansing before 48, but then with the birth of the state of Israel in 1947, what did Israel do? It started expelling Arabs so that they would have a Jewish majority in the state, right? Wrong. Exactly wrong. The exact opposite is true. This is critical. Before the War of 1948, before Israel's War of Independence, there was not so much as one Arab refugee. Not one Arab refugee. But how did the war start? I think we were all taught something very different in Hebrew school than what Mahmoud Abbas says here. What we were taught in Hebrew school was that the Arab states invaded Israel to try to destroy the Jewish state, right? Yes. And what we were taught is that the Arab states said to the poor Palestinians, leave your homes, get out of the way, let us drive the Jews into the sea, and then you'll come back and be able to have your home and their home too. The poor Palestinians were victims. They were pawns of the Arab states who came and tried to destroy Israel. So I want to be clear about something. What we were taught in Hebrew school about the War of 48, when we were taught that the Arab states started that war, it's not true. It's not true. The Arab states did not start the 1948 war. The Arabs of Palestine did. And that's a critical distinction because the Arabs of Palestine are often portrayed as some sort of victim. Agent, without agency in the world. They are pure victims of others. Not entirely true. The Arab states invaded, it's true, in May of 48. But the war started right after this UN vote. The war started in November of 47. There was 6 months from November of 47 to May of 48 when this war was being waged, before the Arab states ever invaded. It was being fought by the Arabs of Palestine against the Jews of Palestine. Of the 800 Arab villages in the British Mandate for Palestine, half of them, 400, sent their men out to fight and try to destroy the Jewish state at its birth. I mean, you all know, at the UN, the Jews voted in favor of partition. They voted in favor of splitting the land. The Arabs not only voted no, they acted on that vote. And the Arabs of Palestine led the charge. So, had they accepted the partition vote, there would not have been a war, and there would not have been so much as one Arab refugee. It was their decision to reject that vote, their decision to try to invade and destroy the Jewish state, that led to a war. Now, once the war was being fought, Palestinians did flee. And I'll tell you more than that. Now that the war is being fought, Israel at a certain juncture decided to fight like every other army in history. They decided to let strategy be part of what drove their actions. And there were junctures when the Jewish state, Israel, captured Arab villages in strategic strongholds and expelled their inhabitants because it was a thinly spread army trying to fight a war against the Arabs of Palestine internally, preparing for a war against the invading Arab states. And they did what armies often do, and tragically do. They made strategic decisions that harmed innocent civilians. But here's what I don't understand. How can you blame Israel for that? How can you blame Israel for choosing to fight back and survive? How can you blame Israel for doing what armies often have to do in wars, which is making strategy as your first goal? When you look throughout recent history, you don't see anything like this. Just two very clear examples, I think, are clarified. Germany, in World War II, launched a war. America and our European allies decided to fight back. In fighting back, we did enormous harm to innocent German civilians. There's no doubt about it. Innocent German civilians suffered in the war that their leaders started. But you don't hear Germans complaining about what the terrible Americans did to them, what the terrible British did to them. There seems to be a fundamental understanding that when you launch a war of conquest and you lose, the suffering is blamed on those who started the war, not those who choose to defend themselves and fight back. Japan, Nagasaki, Hiroshima, we did enormous harm to Japanese civilians in World War II. No doubt about it. Japanese civilians suffered in that war. Well, you don't hear Japanese blaming the horrible Americans for what we did. There seems to be an understanding that when they attacked us at Pearl Harbor, we had a right to defend ourselves, and the suffering that ensued is better placed, the blame is better placed on those who started the war, not those who chose to fight back and defend themselves. War is a terrible, tragic thing. That's why we ought not go around starting it. But I find this unique instance in history where the suffering of civilians is blamed not on those who started the war, not those who sought to conquer, but those who sought to fight back and survive, as an exception, and quite an ugly exception. So again, not one refugee until the Palestinian Arabs started this war. Israelis suffered, Palestinian Arabs suffered. I find it odd that the blame is placed on Israel for this. I place the blame where it belongs, on those leaders who made this terrible, tragic decision. So, okay, no ethnic cleansing before 47. No ethnic cleansing during 47, 48. That gets you to the third myth. And this perhaps is the most prevalent myth. And this, I think, is the most damaging myth of all. And it is the myth that says, fine, what happened, happened. But today you had Israel occupying Palestinian land in the West Bank and Gaza. If Israel would only end its occupation and let the Palestinian Arabs have a state, just like the Jews, then there would be peace, and there would be good relations, and there would be goodwill. Because the barrier to peace today is the occupation. And the day Israel ends its occupation is the day there will be peace in the region. We hear this over and over again, not only from non-Jews, but from Jews, who grew up only knowing a strong Israel that was in control of the West Bank and Gaza. Well, it turns out Israel's offered to do exactly that. Not once, not twice, but actually on 5 separate occasions. On each of these 5 occasions, the Jews of Palestine, later the Israelis, offered the Arabs of Palestine, later the Palestinians, a state of their own in the West Bank of Gaza, or even greater percentages of the land. Each of these times, the Arabs of Palestine, later the Palestinians, turned the offer down. And they often did so violently. And when they did so, there was suffering on both sides, Jewish and Palestinian. Just to go through the 5 examples quickly, it's important to note. In 1937, some people would be familiar with this, the Peel Commission, right? Britain is ruling the British mandate for Palestine. Arabs and Jews are fighting, which is a nice way of saying Arabs are going out and massacring Jews. Britain says, what do we do about this? What do we do to solve these tensions? They sent a commission in to study the problem. The Peel Commission studied the problem, and they recommended for the first time partition. 2 peoples fighting over the same land, divide it, split it. But it was a pretty poor offer. They offered the Jews 30% of the British mandate, basically the coast and a little bit of the Galilee. They offered the Arabs of Palestine the remaining 70%. The Zionist leadership met and debated, and ultimately they decided, as pathetic as the offer was, they would accept it and ask for more. But they accepted this crumb of 30% of the land of Israel. The Arabs of Palestine and the local Arabs met and rejected this offer. No partition, no 30% for the Jews, we want it all. And they not only rejected it in word, they rejected it quite violently. They resumed the Arab revolt. They started attacking British soldiers and Jewish civilians, and hundreds, thousands of more lives were lost. So offer number 1 back in 37, 30% Jews said yes, Arabs said no. 1947, we already covered it. It was more or less a 50-50 split. Actually, the Jews were offered more like 54%. What people miss in that is that of the Jewish 54%, the overwhelming majority was desert. The Negev desert was about 70% of the Jewish 54%. The Arabs were offered the rest, no desert. The Jews, of course, said yes, danced in the streets for joy after the UN voted. The Arabs in Palestine and the Arab states said no, attacked the Jews on their way home, literally attacked them on their way home from their celebrations and launched this war of annihilation. Prices to be paid on both sides because of the second Arab refusal of the second Jewish offer. On the Jewish side, 1% of the Jewish population of Palestine died in Israel's war of independence. Can you imagine that? 1% perished in that war. A significant percentage of them were Holocaust survivors. Literally arrived in the newly created Jewish state from the displaced persons camps in Europe, were given guns, went out to fight a war that the Jews did not want, and a lot of them perished in the process. But of course, this time, the second time, they're suffering on the Arab side. Because when the Jews decided to fight back and survive, or rather than be destroyed and annihilated, there was a war. It did create Palestinian refugees. Innocent Palestinians suffered because of Palestinian rejection. Number 2. Skipping forward, 1967. Y'all know the Six-Day War, right? Yeah. Miraculous. Miraculous. Jews before the Six-Day War thought they were going to be annihilated. And when I was in college, I was taught by these professors, when I was growing up in Hebrew school, I was told this was a miracle. The Six-Day War, Israel defeats all these assembled Arab armies in 6 days. It's a miracle. I got to college and I told, no, everyone understood that Israel would win. They had a far better motivated, better trained army. No one took the Arab army seriously. Really? You know who took the Arab army seriously? The Jews of Israel. They were terrified. They dug 20,000 graves in Yarkon Park in Tel Aviv because they thought at least that many civilians were going to be slaughtered by the invading Arab armies. And miraculously, somehow, and I do believe it was a miracle, Israel wins and conquers the Sinai from Egypt, the Golan from Syria, Gaza from Egypt, Judea and Samaria from Jordan. So, of course, you all know when the Israeli cabinet met 2 weeks after this victory, you all know what they did, right? The Israeli cabinet meets 2 weeks after this miraculous victory, and they says, hey, you guys tried to destroy us, you failed, we're keeping Sinai, we're keeping Golan, we're keeping Judea. They didn't do that. The Israeli cabinet meets 2 weeks after this miraculous victory and says, they voted to offer the Sinai to Egypt for peace, to offer the Golan to Syria in exchange for peace. But there was a split opinion. What do we do with Judea and Samaria? What do we do with the West Bank? Half wanted to give it back to Jordan in exchange for peace. And half didn't want to give it back to Jordan. They wanted to give it to the local residents who were starting. At this point, they were only starting to call themselves Palestinians. The Arab League didn't recognize such a thing as a Palestinian people until 1972. The United Nations didn't recognize such a thing as a Palestinian people until 1972. The first serious discussion about creating a Palestinian state in the West Bank was held by the Israeli cabinet 2 weeks after their victory in the Six-Day War, when half the cabinet wanted to give it to the local Arabs so that they could have their own independent state. But all of these offers were rejected when the Arab League met in Khartoum, Sudan, shortly thereafter, and voted their infamous 3 no's. The Arab League as a whole voted 3 no's. No to peace with Israel, no to recognition of Israel, no to negotiations with Israel. The Palestinians, as they were starting to call themselves, the Palestinian interlocutors who had been working with the Israeli government, creating a committee that would accept power in the West Bank, came back to the Israeli government and said, we can't talk to you anymore. We'll be killed if we talk to you. The Arab League has spoken. The Arab League has voted. So offer number 3 in 1967, rejection number 3, 1967. This time there was not a great price to be paid on the Israeli side. But if there was a price to be paid, it was paid on the Palestinian side. They complained about an occupation. They complained that they're being occupied. It could have ended in 67 had they accepted Israel's offer. They did not. They rejected peace. They rejected negotiations. 2000. The next offer was in 2000 at the culmination of the Oslo peace process of the 1990s. You all know the Oslo peace process. Israel's talking to the Palestinians. They bring Arafat back to the West Bank. And there's discussions about creating a Palestinian state, giving them land gradually. Ultimately, the process bogs down. Ehud Barak is elected Prime Minister of Israel. Just side note, a point of pride, Ehud Barak was named Ehud Brog before he changed his name to Barak. He is my cousin. He is the most decorated soldier in the history of Israel's army. Whether you agree with his policies, disagree with his policies, the risks he took for the Jewish state, the sacrifices he made for the Jewish state are something I, as a cousin, am quite proud of. Barak says, enough. This process is going nowhere. I'm going to push things forward. I'm a man of action. I'm a military man of action. Enough negotiating back and forth. He gets with the Palestinians. They meet in Camp David. Eventually, under the Clinton parameters, he offers Arafat more or less 96% of the West Bank, all of Gaza, and the Arab parts of Jerusalem. Almost everything the Palestinians say they want. Did Arafat come back and say, no, I don't want 96%, I want 98%? No. Arafat said no. And not only did he say no, but shortly thereafter he began competing with Hamas to see who could blow up more Israelis in the Second Intifada. There was a debate about whether he started the Intifada or not. And I've heard arguments on both sides. But what is incontrovertible is that once it began, he started competing with Hamas for street credibility to see who could blow up more Israelis. And I say Israelis, not Jews, because that's who they were blowing up. There was a restaurant in Haifa that was known as a place where Haifa's a mixed city, Arabs and Jews. There was a restaurant in Haifa where it was known that Arabs and Jews would get together and enjoy together great falafel, great hummus. They blew it up. That's exactly what they stood against, this kind of coexistence. Eventually, this intifada, where Arafat and Hamas are competing, took over 1,000 Israeli lives, maimed and mangled over 3,000 more Israelis. That was the account on the Palestinians to Barak's quite generous offer. But hope springs eternal. Not that long after, 2008, Ehud Olmert is in power. And he decided, maybe I can do better than Barak. And there's a new leader of the Palestinians, Mahmoud Abbas. He gets with Abbas and more or less offers Abbas the following. Around 96% of the West Bank, the Arab parts of Jerusalem, Gaza. But, to do one better than Barak, he offered to give Abbas and the Palestinians parts of Israel proper, equal down to the last inch to that 4% of the West Bank he wanted Israel to keep. So I'm going to give you 96% of the West Bank, but every last inch Israel's keeping, we will cut out and give to you from Israel. You will effectively have 100% of the land of the West Bank, the Arab parts of Jerusalem and Gaza. Oh, and by the way, the Holy Basin in Jerusalem that has the Western Wall from which Jews were barred during Jordan's occupation, the Jewish quarter of the Old City, the Temple Mount, we'll submit that to international control. A committee will rule the Holy Basin, and on that committee will sit the Americans, the Israelis, the Jordanians, the Saudis, and the Palestinians. He offered all that to Abbas. Abbas didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He just never got back to Olmert. He actually came up with a very pathetic excuse. He left Olmert's office, home. They were meeting in Olmert's home, and said, let me consider this. I'll come back tomorrow. And then one of his aides called the next day and said, oh, Abbas forgot he has to fly to Jordan today. And it's like a bad date cancellation. They never were able to get back together again. The offer has been documented. The Bush administration knew about the offer. Abbas was unprepared to take the offer. I'll close with this thought. Just like there's a debate about who started the Intifada, there's a debate about why Abbas rejected that offer. Some people say he rejected that offer because he's ultimately a Palestinian who rejects Israel's right to exist. He couldn't sign a document that necessitated recognizing Israel. Others say, no, Abbas is a moderate fellow, good guy. He would have loved to sign that document. He was just afraid to do so. Because he was afraid if he did so, he'd be killed by his own people. My question is, what difference does it make? What difference does it make if Abbas wanted to sign it, but was afraid of his own people, or didn't want to sign it? Ultimately, the Palestinian people, as of 2008, and unfortunately as of today, are a society in which a leader does have to worry about being killed if he makes concessions to Israel. It's still a society where if you go to jail for murdering an Israeli, the that kills Israelis. Your family gets rich financial rewards from the government. It's still a society that is teaching its people that Israel is illegitimate, that Israelis are interlopers, that there is no Jewish history in Jerusalem. So either way, Abbas maybe didn't want to sign it. Maybe he did, but he was afraid of the very people he's educated to find such concessions illegitimate in the first place. Whether you like it or not, whether you agree or not, a young Jew growing up in Israel learns that when the Jews came back to their land, there were other people living there. There were Arabs living there. And they're taught to recognize that that presence in the land leads to some sort of rights or some sort of need for accommodation. And that's why you found Israelis open to peace generation after generation. It's only this latest generation, the generation that grew up during the Second Intifada, that grew up with their cafes and their restaurants and their buses being blown up in response to the most generous peace offer made to date, that has gotten a little skeptical about the peace process, and I would say rightly so. No Palestinian is taught in their schools or in their mosques that the Jews too have a claim to this land, that the Jews too have rights in this land, that they too belong here. No Palestinian is taught that to compromise with the Jews is not an abject surrender, but rather a noble compromise. And I fear that unless and until that changes, whether it's Abbas or whether it's someone else, you'll find the same meaningless dilemma. They will not pursue peace plans. They will not sign peace plans, either because they believe what they teach their people, or because they're afraid of the very people they've educated to insist that Israel has no legitimacy in rights. I'm not optimistic about the future of peace. Two final notes. One, I am optimistic that when you talk to people about this history, you talk to them about the 5 times the Israelis offered the Palestinians a state and the 5 times they rejected it, it becomes harder to insist on this simplistic slogan that it's all Israel's fault, that Israel should end the occupation, that doing so would bring peace. And if you look carefully on the Palestinian side, it's in its early stages, and it's too early to take heart. But there are actually young Palestinians now who seem more interested in starting tech companies and building businesses and creating in Ramallah what's a really nice up-and-coming town. And in these people who seem to be breaking away from this cycle of hate, the cycle of recrimination, in these people who finally are more interested in building for the future than getting revenge for an imagined past, you do start to get a little hope that maybe a next generation, or a generation after that, can break this cycle of hate, can break this cycle of lies, can break this cycle of delegitimization, and finally be a partner for peace. But unless and until that happens, Israel's got to stand strong. It's got to insist on telling the truth, and has to insist on protecting its citizens. And that all of us and our children can defend proudly. With that, let's open up a little bit.
I'd like to recommend to anybody who hasn't to read your book. I was sent by Kufire on a donation, Standing Up for Israel. Could you comment on the attachment and the reason that the evangelical Christians have such a love for Israel?
My pleasure. Thank you for the question. Thank you for the book club. Let me see that. My first book was called Standing with Israel, and it explains why Christians support Jews. And I want to get back to that. But my most recent book is called Reclaiming Israel's History. I only wrote 3 books, so it's easy to find on Amazon. Reclaiming Israel's History. Everything I just mentioned and a lot more is in this book, because we have to reclaim Israel's history from those that are distorting it so terribly. So it's a funny thing. I grew up on the East Coast in a town near Atlantic City with a pretty good Jewish population. And I worked for, as Lisa noted, a guy named Arlen Specter, who was a Pennsylvania senator. Glenn would tease me mercilessly. Glenn who worked for more conservative senators. But I spent a lot of time with him in Pennsylvania. And James Carville once described Pennsylvania very well. He said, Pennsylvania is a funny state. You have Philly in the east, Pittsburgh in the west, and Alabama in between. If you've ever been to central Pennsylvania, you know what he means. Central Pennsylvania, you're in the northeast, but it's really rural, it's really conservative, and it's really Christian. And I spent all this time in central PA, and I met a lot of evangelicals who would find out I'm Jewish, or I had just spent time in Israel before I worked for Senator Specter. And they would tell me how much they love Israel, and how much they love me because I'm Jewish. And I remember thinking to myself, when these evangelicals told me how much they loved me and the Jewish people, I thought, baloney, bull. For 2,000 years, you people tried to kill us. For 2,000 years, you people tried to convert us at the point of a sword. And now you tell me you love us? No way. Baloney. But an interesting thing happened. I got to know some of these people. And you know the best way to overcome any prejudice? Because that's what I suffered from, was prejudice. The best way to overcome any prejudice is to get to know the people in the group you're prejudiced against. I got to know for the first time in my life some evangelical Christians. And you know what? They were lovely people who really did care about me. So then I started to wonder, well, why is it they're so wonderful and they're so lovely, but everyone tells me they're only supporting Israel to speed the second coming, at which point Jesus will kill me. Right? It's the Inquisition with a smiley face. Same goal. The Inquisition, they want to kill or convert the Jews. Why do Christians support Israel? They support Israel to speed the second coming of Jesus. Jesus comes back and kills us or converts us. It's the same thing. So there seemed to be an odd thing going on between the people I was meeting and truly caring about, and what I was being told was these nefarious reasons for Christian support. So I began a project of pure geeky research, for no other reason than I was curious. I started showing up in evangelical churches that were known to be pro-Israel without announcing who I was, and listening to what they said. I heard about this guy in Texas named John Hagee, who was really pro-Israel. So I ordered, it must have been a great day for John Hagee Ministries. I ordered every video on Israel and every book on Israel, and I read them all and listened to them all. And I started going to conferences and to the Christian Broadcasters Conference. After a few years, I came to certain conclusions that I wrote in my first book, Standing with Israel. And long story short, I realized, number one, I and many Jews had been guilty of doing unto evangelical Christians exactly what had been done unto us by very different Christians in very different places for centuries. Right? They used to judge us without knowing us. They used to talk about things in the Talmud. The Talmud says you can kill Gentiles, you just can't kill Jews. How do I know what's in the Talmud? Right? These people never saw a Talmud, let alone read the Talmud, but they presumed to know what was in it. And on the basis of this presumption, rivers of Jewish blood was spilled. But here I was judging people I knew nothing about, the faith I knew nothing about, and just assuming I knew what motivated them. Shame on me, and shame on us. So I started this research, and at the end of it, to cut a long story short, I concluded Christians support Israel for reasons that resemble the same reasons why Orthodox Jews support Israel, why religious Jews support Israel. It's the same mindset, it's the same motives. Number one, it's the Bible. Not the prophecies in the book of Revelation. The promises in the book of Genesis. The promises we share. They read the same Bible and come to the same conclusion. God promised this land to the Jewish people. God promised to bring the Jewish people back to this land. When you see God fulfilling his promises in the world, that's a good thing. You want to support that. The promises in the Bible. But that's not just it. People who try to caricature Christians as this Bible people living living centuries ago miss a lot. Because there's also a recognition of the tragedy of Jewish history. Right? Christians who support Israel tend to understand deeply the tragedies of Jewish history, how we've suffered because of our lack of power in the state. But more than that, their cognizance of the tragedies of Jewish history are spiked a bit. But I would say there's some Christian guilt. Because so many of these tragedies were perpetrated by people who claim to be Christians. So many of our worst tragedies occurred in lands populated by Christians. And so it's a feeling that they know our tragedies, they know our need for a state, and they want to show that Christians are better, and Christians behave better, and make up for those who claim to be Christians who did these things. And then the final piece of it, of course, is knowledge about Israel itself. Just like an Orthodox Jew, Christians understand Israel's struggle for survival. They understand the truth about Israel's struggle for survival, and they know how just it is. And these three things combine in an evangelical friend, as they do in a Bible-believing Jewish friend, to create quite a powerful motive, quite a noble motive, a motive that drives so much of the support we see in America today, a support for which I and I think this crowd are extremely grateful. So on behalf of our Christian friends here today, thank you for your support. Thank you for caring. Thank you for standing with us.
How would you describe Jared Kushner's and why did it work?
So questions about Jared Kushner's peace plan and why would it work? First of all, I don't know what's in it. No one really knows what's in it. So it's hard to say. But one of the reasons why people are skeptical about it is because it's hard for me to imagine the Palestinian leadership accepting any deal that necessitates two things: recognizing Israel's existence and saying it's the end of the conflict. It's hard to see. And there, you'll meet people who disagree. You'll meet people who say, wait a minute. Yasser Arafat recognized Israel. Right? Yasser Arafat wanted peace. Or Mahmoud Abbas is a moderate. He wants peace. When you look at what they actually did, when you look at the fine print, it's less impressive than it was. And by the way, at the time, I was very excited by the Oslo peace process. Now, I have a lot of Israeli friends, family, and I always felt like being skeptical of the peace process was a luxury I had as an American Jew who does not wear the uniform and whose sons will not wear the uniform. Well, I should note, I married an Israeli, so my sons probably will wear the uniform, but I didn't think they would. It's a luxury I have to be skeptical. But when you're in Israel and you hold your little boy, and your little boy is going to be going to the army, I think you cling to any shred of hope. It can lead to mistakes. It can lead to dangerous mistakes, but I understand it. Because you cling to any hope that maybe, just maybe, this generation, right? The founding generation fought so that their sons wouldn't have to fight. The sons went off to war and they fought so their sons wouldn't have to fight, and on it goes. So I saw Oslo, and my Israeli friends were hopeful, and I was hopeful. And I think I ignored things that were warning signs that, in retrospect, we all should have seen, and a lot of people did see. But when you looked at the fine print, Arafat never recognized Israel as a Jewish state, and he never gave up on the right of return. Right? And the right of return basically means flooding Israel, the Jewish state, with enough returning Palestinians that it's no longer a Jewish majority and ceases to be a Jewish state. Right? They're very careful in their wording. They're very careful in what they agree to. Abbas has spoken about mutual recognition. He has. He's been very moderate at times. If you listen to him at certain times, he's very moderate. But he continues educating his people that the Jews have no right, that the Jews are defiling the Temple Mount with their dirty feet. They're defiling Jerusalem. He continues to pay people who murder Israelis. He continues to pay the families of those who die murdering Israelis. And he's never given up on the right of return either. So he said no to Olmert's offer. I think he would say no to any offer that necessitated recognizing Israel as a Jewish state, ending the conflict and giving up the right of return. Given that, it wasn't clear to me what Kushner would offer that would change things. But again, you hope. You just hope. Maybe something would change. Maybe something will be different. Maybe this time Abbas will say, I'm an old man, I want to do something good before I go. But how does he define good? What does he see as good? I don't know, and I'm let's just say this, I'm not optimistic. My only hope is this very small group of young entrepreneurs that just maybe can chart a different path. In the back, sir.
About that, whether or not that'll pass. I mean, we could find out what's in it just by passing it. Just pressing for that. We could pass it to find out what's in it.
The peace plan?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But more seriously, I wanted to get your take on what you're saying about the goal of just demographic takeover in terms of voting. What is, if anything, I mean, I checked earlier today, I still haven't seen any kind of conclusions about the current election. I know the blue and white party, which I believe is Lapid, if I'm not mistaken. Half the people, okay, well, so half stupid. That has been going on. I think one of the joint lists got a serious number of votes in this one. Like they literally are doing a demographic takeover in terms of the voting blocks.
Yeah, well, the question was about the Israeli elections and what's happening there. Your guess is as good as mine. It's quite an interesting mess. But the specific question was pointing to the fact that the joint party, the Arabs, there were a few different Arab parties that got together and created a joint Arab party. And that party it got 12 seats. It's the third biggest party in Israel. And a lot of folks in that party, it's not like these are Arab citizens of the Jewish state who let me tell you something. There are Arab citizens of the Jewish state who love the Jewish state. Some of them serve in the Israeli military. I met a wonderful man, I don't know if any of you met him, named Father Gabriel Nadaf. He is a priest in Nazareth, in Israel, who looked around and saw what was happening to the Christian communities in every other country in the region. Right? In Syria, they're being slaughtered. In Egypt, they're being slaughtered. In Iraq, they're being slaughtered, decimated. And he said, gee, you know what? If you're going to be a Christian in the Middle East, you're very lucky to be a Christian in Israel, the only country in the Middle East where the Christian population is growing, not shrinking rapidly. And so he created a movement to encourage Christian Arabs in Israel to join the idea. He was immediately attacked by the Arabs in Nazareth. Nazareth used to be a Christian town. It's become an overwhelmingly Muslim town that's somewhat intolerant of its Christian minority. Just like Bethlehem used to be a Christian town, it's become an overwhelmingly Muslim town that's often intolerant of its Christian minority. He got attacked from the Muslims in Nazareth, got death threats. His son, who joined the idea, was badly beaten one day coming home to visit his father on the weekend. He also got attacked by the media, some of the left-leaning media in Israel, tragically. And it didn't go well for Father Nadaf. He got discouraged and he ended his efforts. To this day, however, there are Arab citizens of the Jewish state who serve in Israel's army. There are Muslim citizens of the Jewish state who serve in Israel's army for the same reasons. They look around and they say, you know what? The freest Arabs in the Middle East are the Arab citizens of the Jewish state. Right? What other country in the region can you vote for or against your government, serve in or protest your government without having to fear for your life or your freedom? The freest Arabs in the Middle East are the Arab citizens of Israel. More than that, the freest Muslims in the Middle East are the Muslim citizens of the Jewish state. In what other country in the region can you worship Allah as you see fit, or choose not to worship Allah at all and not fear for your freedom or your life? Only in Israel. Only in Israel. So Muslims serve for this reason. But unfortunately, these are not the views that characterize the joint list. The joint list, it has a lot of folks in it who do not believe Israel should be a Jewish state, do not have great gratitude towards the Jewish state, and come with a lot of criticism of the Jewish state. But I think it's a testimony to the resilience of Israel's democracy and the reality of Israel's democracy that we all should be aware of. The third biggest party now in Israel is an Arab party, and they're going to play some role in what's going to happen now in the future and the fate of the nation. That's real democracy, folks, 100%.
So, my oldest is in college, and I have one middle You know, there are safe schools for Jews, there are unsafe schools for Jews. And I remember 5 years ago at the leadership meeting in Vegas, I think we were there together, and all of a sudden this amazing task force called the Maccabee Task Force was created, literally in just sitting there and brainstorming. And I wanted you to speak a little bit about the Maccabee Task Force, what it is, what we can do as parents and grandparents to support our students and our youth, because the last thing I want to do as a parent is to send my child into harm's way. He should be, or she should be, going to university to learn, to study, to be successful, to be confident, not to defend his or her religion, her political beliefs, her family. My father's Israeli, his father's Israeli. You know, it's a sad state of affairs, and I feel like that's, I mean, what you spoke about is amazing, but please can you talk a little bit about the Maccabee Task Force? I know we have some representatives from Hillel here, and they can probably, you know, take some of those talking points perhaps, and pass it on to the students, and so I'll just hand it over to you.
No, thanks for that. I get to plug my book and my job. I appreciate it. So, yeah, in 2015, there was this great big gathering in Las Vegas, and some very serious donors, Sheldon and Miriam Allison, and also Chaim Saban was with us at the time. He's not anymore. Came together and said, you know what, this BDS effort, and BDS is just a catchphrase, right? When we say BDS, it's just a tactic. What we mean is the effort to delegitimize Israel on campus. This effort to delegitimize Israel on campus has been going on for over a decade. It's picking up steam. It's taking an increasing toll. And our community has not really seriously stepped up to the plate to respond. I mean, there are lots of efforts going on in lots of places, and lots of valuable efforts and important efforts. But as a community, our top donors never really stepped up to the plate and funded a serious, deep dig, major strategy. And so they decided the time had come to do that, and they created this effort called the Maccabee Task Force. And they invited me to come work for the Maccabee Task Force. And my immediate reaction was great, but what do I do? What do you do? How do you fight back against delegitimization? How do you fight back against an effort that's been underway for over a decade? And is part of a larger zeitgeist, is part of a larger movement on the left in America. When I talk about the left in America, I'm not being partisan. I confess, I'm conservative. But I'm just trying to be objective here, not partisan. There is something going on in the progressive left in America that is associating being anti-Israel, being critical of Israel, with other social justice positions one needs to take to be a progressive, you know, in good standing. And so that's going on. BDS plugged into it, turbocharged it. We have a big problem on our hands. It took us a while to figure out what to do. We wasted some money in the beginning, funding efforts and projects and organizations that did not give us a good return on investment. Ultimately, out of desperation, we did something that proved to be very effective, which is we went to the campuses themselves. Imagine this. We actually went to the campuses themselves and tried to meet with the stakeholders on campus, the pro-Israel Jewish students on campus, and any professional whose focus is on the campus, not up to some larger organization. So Hillel directors and Hillel staff were critical to us because their focus is really on the campus. And so we sat with the pro-Israel Jewish students, the Hillel director, the Israel fellow, if you're familiar with that, a shliach from Israel that serves on a lot of the big campuses, and the Chabad rabbis. And we said to them, you know, help us out here. If money were no object, what would you like to do this year to combat the delegitimization of Israel or proactively promote Israel on your campus that you can't do for lack of money? And to our pleasant surprise, we started on 6 campuses, just a test on 6 campuses. Our pleasant surprise, the first campus we did this at, they had some really good ideas, things we hadn't thought of. We went down the street to the next campus, they had other good ideas, different from the ideas at Campus A. Third campus, same thing. So eventually we found we could do two very important things for the pro-Israel communities on campus. One, We could bring together the best, most effective strategies that had been developed on these campuses but not shared more broadly. And then 2, we could fund them. What good is it if I come to you with a great strategy if you don't have the funds to implement it? So we started a process, and we grew from 6 campuses to 20 the next year, to 40 the next year, to 80 last year, this year 100. And when we're on a campus, I don't mean we're on a campus and that we have a fellow we trained for a weekend or we gave a micro grant of $1,000. I mean, thanks to the generosity of the Allisons. And I'm in a friendly crowd, so I don't need to say this, but like them or not, when they do things for the future of the Jewish people, I don't care what your politics are, people should appreciate it. I speak in crowds that are more liberal, and then I say the Allisons, and people piss. That makes me angry, because you can like them or not. When they fund cancer research that could save you or your children, you should appreciate that. When they fund Birthright, it's the most effective program for Jewish education and continuity in America. Even if you're liberal and disagree with them politically, you should appreciate that. And when they fund the Maccabees to enable our students, to give them the tools and the resources to fight back, I think regardless of your politics, you should appreciate that. So their generosity has enabled us when we're on a campus. Our average figure is $130,000 per campus. And that enables us to do big things. So for example, the most effective thing we do, without a doubt, is we go to a campus and we talk to our partners on campus and we say, we want you to map your campus. Figure out who are the 15 to 20 campus leaders, typically not Jewish, who control campus politics. Right? It's usually just 15 or 20 people that really dominate campus politics. Tell us who they are, get to know them, and bring them to Israel. And we'll pay for it. Right? Nice idea, no one could do it unless the Allisons gave them the wherewithal. That is a game changer. Right? I was talking to you earlier. The truth is powerful. The truth is effective. You know what the challenge is? Getting people to pay attention to the truth for 5 minutes. Right? Going into this organized worldview in which Israel's become a demon and trying to get them to pay attention to you enough that you can actually change their mind. You could bring the best pro-Israel in the world to campus. If no one shows up to hear him, which is typically the case, you haven't changed anything. So we do these trips on campus, very expensive, but we're able to offer them. Then we realized, you know what? Some of our campuses are not doing a very good job recruiting for the trip. It takes a lot of time and effort to get to know these people so that they're comfortable enough with you that they'll accompany you on a journey to Israel. So we started funding more efforts to recruit for the trip. And we found out, great, it's nice you got the head of the African American students on your bus to Israel, and he's now friendly. Wouldn't it be good when you come back if you could use him as a bridge to connect the pro-Israel community to the black community on campus? So we started funding follow-up activities tailored to each community we tend to work with on campus. We realized on many campuses we have a problem. The base is too small. There are too few pro-Israel activists on campus. So we identified programs that help train and grow the base on campus. And the key there we found was that there were existing programs to train pro-Israel activists. But you either had to fly to Israel and do them, or you had to fly to some conference on one of the coasts to do it. We bring the pro-Israel activists in training to the campus. We're busy students who are apathetic, right? If they're not involved, they're typically apathetic. We bring the training to them on campus, give them some pizza, give them a little stipend for attending. All of a sudden, they come out of the process caring about Israel. Program after program after program. We go to campuses now, and we do an action plan meeting in the fall with all of the stakeholders on campus, where we, ask them for their ideas, because each campus is still a laboratory. Each campus still comes up with, delegitimization is changing from year to year. It's like a virus that shifts and changes. So we have to keep coming up with new ideas and new responses and new themes. The campuses are the laboratories where people are coming up with these ideas. So each campus is still a laboratory for us. We go to the campus and ask them for their ideas. If it's a good idea and it works well, we then offer it nationally. Then after we've heard their ideas, we offer them the best strategies we've accumulated from our 80 and this year 100 campuses across the country. Filled with excellent, effective, tried and tested strategies, and I'm proud to say none of these ideas were my idea. None of these ideas were my staff's idea. Every single one of these ideas came from people trying to do good work with limited resources on the ground. And so we offer each campus, we have a package now, 25, 30 strategies. And we make a deal. We say, tell you what, if you're willing to do these things, we'll fund them. And by the way, you don't have to put our name on it. And by the way, we're not going to be sending out a press release after you did it to say, look what we did. We are probably the largest pro-Israel organization that you've never heard of. But that's the way it should be, because who's doing the work? It's the students, it's the professionals on campus. They're the ones who are going to the trouble and taking the risks of doing these things. They're the ones who should be able to do it the way they see fit, and they're the ones who should get the credit for it. So I'm proud to say that the process is going very well. This past year, we brought over 1,500 campus leaders to Israel. And short of birthright, I don't know anyone bringing this many young people to Israel, but each bus was great. Kufi does it. Kufi typically does it with the Christian students on campus, trying to, I would call Kufi trips building the base trips. They try to identify Christian students to bring into the pro-Israel world, and that's important. So we have to grow both the Jewish pro-Israel world and the Christian pro-Israel world. Our trips serve a different goal, which is trying to persuade leaders, often critical leaders, to see the truth about Israel and to stop being critics and start being friends. And so almost all the people we brought were critical of Israel or distant from Israel, but in positions of leadership, almost all of them on the left, by the way. The leaders of most campuses these days are on the left. But the good news is, when they see the reality. This is where our opponents do us, by lying so dramatically about Israel, they do us a little bit of a favor. Because when people see how starkly different the reality is compared to the lies, then there's an opportunity there to really get them to think differently. Okay, sir.
2 points. In this building last week, I was honored with Alpha Epsilon Pi fraternity, and funds went for BDS and anti-Semitism on campus. And a lot of things you said AEPI is doing right now. It's the largest Jewish fraternity in the world. That's my commercial. Second, I met a lady about 6 months ago, and I told her how much I appreciated Christians helping Israel, and that we working in the Congress and working with everything, and how important that was. I spent about 5 minutes with her. She broke down and cried. She said, "You're the first Jew to ever thank me for supporting Israel. I've been praying for Israel for 25 years. Wow. Peace in Jerusalem."
It's a common story, by the way. Two things. AEPI, very, very important. We invite AEPI to our meetings on the ground. AEPI students do a lot of work with us. It's a pro-Israel fraternity. We don't have many. Second point is true. I can't tell you how many Christians. That's an interesting thing. I mean, Christians are supporting Israel because it's the right thing to do. They're supporting Israel because they believe it's the moral thing to do, the Christian thing to do. They're not doing it for our thanks, for our gratitude. But you know what? When you're a human being, it's nice sometimes when you do the right thing and it's recognized. Instead of being met with suspicion and fear and a wall of distrust. So it's very meaningful, and I would urge all of us, when we have Christian friends who support Israel, to remember the Jewish mitzvah of Hakarat HaTov. To remember that it's in fact a commandment on us to recognize when people do good and moral and righteous things. And thank them. It means a lot. Okay, ma'am.
You mentioned that there's growing support for the BDS movement. I find that to be very alarming. Way past worrisome. We all know about it, but there are a lot of people who really don't know about it. They know what the letters stand for. This, I think, is a real threat to the existence of Israel. Could you please elaborate a little bit on what was done? And we got the squad who is going to champion Israel, the BDS movement. Social media is so prevalent now. What in the world can we do to kind of stop this?
Yeah, so the question is about BDS and how bad it is and what we can do to stop it. And I want to reinforce the point. There are people who say, you know what? BDS is a failure, right? BDS boycott, divest, and sanction Israel. To date, you know how much money the BDS movement on college campuses has taken out of the Israeli economy?
Zip.
Zero. Even if they pass a BDS resolution on campus, the administration ignores it. No college is divested from Israel. So what are we worried about? It's failed. The Israeli economy keeps growing while they're trying to boycott Israel. It was never about finances. It was never about crippling Israel economically at the college level. At the corporate level it is, and by the way, there they have some successes. At the college level, it was about recognizing that Israel, for now, for the foreseeable future, needs a strong relationship with the United States. This is an extraordinarily important alliance for the state of Israel. If for nothing more than the fact that we've exercised a veto at the UN, it has saved Israel from becoming the next Iraq. It has saved Israel from facing an international army to force its will upon Israel. Then there's the financial aid, and more than anything, the moral support. So they see this, and they said, hey, wouldn't it be great if we could create a gap, a distance between the U.S. and Israel? A better place to do this than with young people. And so BDS is really an effort aimed at tearing apart the relationship between the U.S. and Israel, turning young hearts and minds against Israel. And there, I feel, together with other forces, it's hard to know who gets blame here, but there I feel it's been extremely successful. If you look at any polling over the last decade, the younger you get demographically in America, the less likely you are to support Israel. And the further left you get politically, the less likely you are to support Israel. Young people on the left, and that's who dominates our college campuses, are more likely to be sympathetic to the Palestinians than Israel. It's just a fact proven by repeated polling. I think part of the reason for that is because of BDS campaigns and delegitimization, and the fact that they've been lucky enough and strategic enough to combine their cause with other social justice causes that are very popular on campus. What do we do about it? It's a long story. There are many hands up. But I would just say this, and this is a challenge for all of us, by the way. The game is on the left today. I mean, in a sense, we've done our work. Republicans are extraordinarily pro-Israel. The base of the conservative movement is extraordinarily pro-Israel. That wasn't a foregone conclusion, by the way. I mean, one of the reasons why I was so excited to work for CUFI and why I think CUFI is so important is because there was Pat Buchanan and then Ron Paul and now Rand Paul. There have been challenges on the right. But we who support Israel on the right have done our work. We've risen to the occasion. We fought back, we pushed back with Christian friends in the lead, really. We have made sure that at least for a generation, the right is pro-Israel in America. You never know beyond that, by the way. You never know beyond that. The left, it's collapsing. It's collapsed. And I fault our leaders on the left. Long story. Show you how naive I am. Not only was I excited about the Oslo peace process, when I heard that J-Stu was being created, I thought it was fantastic. And this is what we need. We need a pro-Israel group making the progressive case for Israel to progressives in progressive language. We need it. Unfortunately, they're not it. Unfortunately, they're just reciting the same old anti-Israel stuff, and frankly, that market is already pretty well served. We didn't need another group doing it, and doing it as Jews. But what we need is people on the left, or people with connections to the left, to go out. Don't have to make stuff up. Don't have to lie. Don't have to fabricate. Go out and make the very powerful, progressive case for Israel to progressives in progressive language. And that's an urgent mission. There are great progressives doing it. And there are people like us. I'm conservative. The Allisons are conservative. But we realize where the challenge is today. And so we're funding people to go out and do this. Luckily, on the campuses, a lot of these students and a lot of the professionals, they're connected to the very world we need to reach. And so they're doing what is the important work today that's easier for them than it is for us as members of the RJC. Okay, you tell me.
Okay, how about one more question? Okay.
You're the boss.
Okay.
Okay, well, I don't know who, let's take this gentleman here in the blue shirt.
Okay. So, in terms of myths,
Yeah.
one concept that was mentioned by your classmate, President Obama, was regarding this, we have to go back to the 1967 border. Now, if we go back to, let's just say, 1847, okay, we would be in Mexican territory now, okay? And no one is thinking about returning Arizona to Mexico, okay? So where in history and what do you think about this idea that we should go back to some border from over 50 years ago?
So, it's a tough issue, obviously, what to do with the land. I've grown skeptical. I mean, I was someone who was open to the idea that, hey, the Palestinians only want what the Jews want, right? They want their own state, their own flag, their own money, Arafat's picture, or whatever funny mug they want to put on it. It's going to be painful, right? This is the biblical heartland of Israel. The Bible took place in Judea and Samaria, in the West Bank, not Tel Aviv. Right? That's where the Philistines live. So this is the biblical heartland of Israel. This is the strategic heartland of Israel, for reasons I'll mention. But again, I knew a lot of Israelis, and so I thought, you know what? I don't have the luxury of being greedy about biblical and strategic lands for them. They tell me they want peace. They tell me they don't want their sons going off to the army anymore. And so maybe if that option's here, maybe that's the price you pay. Mm-hmm. Avadi Yosef, the leader of the Shas party, great Orthodox scholar, he declared back in those days, he said, if you can save life, then halachically you should give up the life. So it's not a clear-cut halachic thing. So I was sympathetic to it, but you have to learn from history and the response of the Palestinians to those offers. The paroxysm, the explosion of brutal violence perpetrated upon Israelis in the Second Intifada as a response to the most generous peace offer that had been made to Israel, not only persuaded me that this was not a good idea, it persuaded Israelis. And what's interesting now is you see people criticizing Israelis. This is just on the list of things that annoys me. Arabs have to talk about hating Israel, right? And they have to pay terrorists who kill them, right? Abbas has to pay terrorists who kill Israelis because he has to compete on with the Arab street, right? Why did Arafat have to compete with Hamas to see who could blow up more Israelis? Because he had to compete on the Arab street. He had to have credibility on the Arab street. This is what people used to tell me. Don't be so ignorant as to condemn this. This is life. You have to compete on the Arab street for credibility. This is what Arafat has to do to stay in power. We're willing to remove all morality, all agency from the Palestinians. We're willing to suffer any atrocity they want to perpetrate against Israelis, not just Jews, because the Arab street demands it. Well, I got news for you. There's a Jewish street too. And the Jewish street says, when we make the most generous peace offer in history, and the response is blowing up our sons and daughters in restaurants and buses and cafes, we're going to be careful before we do it again. We're going to be careful before we do it again. And now I was writing about this generation. My wife is of this generation. My wife grew up in Netanya. Right? She remembers being literally locked in there. Netanya is the closest to the West Bank of any major Israeli city. It was the heart of the Second Intifada. When they blew up the Passover Seder at the hotel in Netanya, her Passover plate shook. When they blew up the malls in Netanya, she was not allowed to go out of the house. She and a generation like her are skeptical of peace. And I must say, I think for good reason. I don't think it's an overreaction. But no one understands them. They're warmongers. They're extremists. What happened to understanding the Jewish street, which I think is reasonable, by the way? If the Jewish street wanted to harm innocent Arab civilians, I'm sorry, I'm not with them. And there are some people like that. I'm sorry. I despise everything they stand for. forgotten who they are. They've forgotten their Jewish morality. They've forgotten what we as a people stand for in life. There are certain things I'll never understand, even if there's support for it. But to say, wait a minute, this great offer didn't bring peace, and we're going to be careful before we do it again, I think is an eminently reasonable and understandable reaction. But then, of course, it's not all. Because in 2005, Sharon withdrew every last soldier and settler from Gaza. And what was the response from Gaza? Did the rocket fire from Gaza to Israel decrease? No, it dramatically increased, right? We removed every soldier and settler from Gaza. The response from Hamas is, let's fire more missiles into Israel. But you know what? That's okay. Because the only people who grow up with PTSD and who grow up with severe trauma because of the thousands of rockets fired at Israeli cities, they fire at cities, folks, not at military installations. The only people suffering from this are the poor Jews of Sderot and Ashdod and Ashkelon. Not the well-off people of Tel Aviv, not the well-off people of Jerusalem, so it's okay. I got news for you. The West Bank is the strategic highland that dominates and overlooks the 7 to 10 mile wide coastal plain that contains over 70% of Israel's population and economic infrastructure. If Hamas ever took over the West Bank, forget about importing, smuggling in guided precision missiles like they have to do in Gaza. Forget it. The crudest homemade Qassam rocket that they produce by the thousands. The crudest homemade Qassam rocket can hit any cafe in Tel Aviv, any bus stop in Jerusalem, and shut down Ben Gurion Airport. So Israelis learned another lesson, this time from the Gaza withdrawal, which is unilateral withdrawal is very risky. Hamas took over and increased their rocket fire. And most people, if you talk to them, say the minute Israel leaves the West Bank, Abbas won't last 2 weeks. Because the Arab street doesn't seem to like his moderation. Hamas takes over, and then you have a situation where the entire country is shut down. So again, because of the experience of the Second Intifada, because of what happened in Gaza, I, and more importantly, Israelis have grown skeptical. And I think for good reason. And I think whatever our views, we have to understand that and appreciate that and defend that. Does it mean that there can be, never be peace? I would hate to say that. But I do think there needs to be a change in leadership. There needs to, this is just a closing thought. A good closing thought. So, my wife, her father is a religious Jew who was born in Tripoli, Libya. And her mother is a secular Ashkenazi whose father survived Auschwitz. So it's an interesting family. She sits in the bedroom watching German television, because she grew up in a German home. He sits in the kitchen watching the movies from Egypt, all the good Arabic stuff. His family was extremely wealthy in Tripoli. They owned land, stores, properties. They were very wealthy. When they fled for their lives to Israel, they had 10 children. But his parents, his formerly wealthy parents, were impoverished. They couldn't take their money with them. To this day, they can't claim their funds. So their newly impoverished parents raised him and his 9 siblings in one room at a time. One room.
Wow.
My wife's mother, they survived Auschwitz and moved to Israel. But what's interesting? She's typical. I mentioned her not because she's special. She is special. But she's typical. Not one word spoken in that home against German people. Not one word to hate, God forbid, German people who were innocent. Not one word, we're going to go back and get what's ours in Germany. The father? Not one word, God forbid, against Arab people. Not one word of hatred towards Libyans or Arabs. Not one word about we're going to go take what's ours in Tripoli. Right? Her parents, and Israelis as a whole, forgot what happened in the past and just tried to look forward and build. To build homes and families and communities in the country. That's why Israel's so successful today. The plague on Palestinian society has been that their leaders took a different approach. They have chosen to look back in anger rather than look forward and hope. That is the trap. That is the trap. They have suffered as a people. their own leaders. And they've chosen to look back in anger at the Israelis whom they've led, rather than forward in hope. And ultimately, my hope is tied to a new generation coming up, looking over the border and saying, God, gee, those young Israelis who are not busy plotting how to kill Libyans or kill Germans, but are actually busy building lives and businesses and families, we want to be like them. And we want to build for the future like that. I do believe when that day comes, like Anwar Sadat flew to Jerusalem and was sincere for a week, right? Decades of enmity, decades of war. Sadat was sincere for a week. And Menachem Begin, the most right-wing Jewish leader to date, made peace with Egypt. I do believe when that generation comes and is sincere about peace, sincere about building a future together, I think at that point, even the hardened Jewish street, even the hardened Israeli street, says, yeah, that's a better future. Let's do that together. That's my hope. God willing, one day, time will tell. Thank you.